it is a non-denominational way of being able to honor our ancestors. It's a cultural form of honoring, and those of us who acknowledge our African roots understand that before we begin any program, we honor our ancestors, we honor God Almighty, and so on and so forth, to make sure that we bring in the positive energy for the program that we are about to have. So because I follow the tradition of the Yoruba people called Ifa, I pour in Yoruba, but I also will translate in English. And I would like for you all, when we call names, for you all to make noise. So you can tap on the table, you can do whatever, because what we're trying to do is we understand that we live in a world that is multidimensional. And one of the dimensions is the spirit world. We want to wake up the spirit and tell the good spirits to come and help us to have a wonderful program. So the things that I have listed here are basically symbols, which is what, of course, we deal with in terms of what I have on here. I put together a little small altar so that you can see some of the things that we would use in order to pour libation. But we have remembrances of our ancestors. So I have a picture here of the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey. And then over here I have Dr. John Henry Clark and Dr. Ben Buchanan, who were basically the two foremost African historians that we have had in the 20th and 21st century. This is a picture of my mother, who died last year at 110 years old. So one of the things that we do, of course, and symbolically, is I have a candle, which is basically when you have somebody invited to your house, what do you do for them to recognize where you live? You turn the light on and say, welcome, come. So I have a light here for them, and I have some incense smoking so that the house smells sweet when they come. I have symbols of flowers, of living things, to recognize the fact that our ancestors are not dead. We believe that as long as we call their names, that they will live. And so I am going to pour the libation with water rather than with gin or some other spirit, basically to acknowledge the fact that we come from water, that 70% of our bodies are water. So I begin the libation by paying homage to Mother Earth and Father Sky. And I say, Omi tutu, ile tutu, ona tutu. Tutu eshu, tutu boom, tutu batala, tutu shambo, tutu yamaja, tutu aya, tutu shun, tutu rumada, tutu risha, tutu alusun. Mochiba olurum, mochiba olofi, mochiba olufimare. I will translate for you what I have said as I'm trying to cool the energies down so that only positive energy exists among us. So I'm asking the water to cool things down. I have now acknowledged the presence and pay homage and honor to the elements of that maintain this hemisphere, not this hemisphere, but this ecosystem that we live in. So Shango, Yamaja, Oiga, Oshun represent the elements of the earth, Ogun, the elements that live here, the water, the air, the sunshine, all of the things that we need as human beings to live on this earth. So I've acknowledged them. Then I said, Mojiba, Olurum, Mojiba, Olofi, Mojiba, Oludumare. I pay homage to God Almighty in all his forms, the maker of heaven and earth, the creator of all existence, the owner of the universe. Mojiba, Ibaye, Egungobo, Ibaye. Mojiba, Baba, Lurisha, Lurisha, Lurisha. Mojiba, Bobo, Ibaye, Oludumare, Ibaye, Oludumare. I have just said that I pay homage to all of those ancestors and all of those spirits that sit on both sides of God Almighty, on the left side and on the right side. And now I say, Kinkumashe, Asheda, Kinkumashe, Akoda. I pay homage to those who are the eldest priests in the tradition that I follow in Ifa, Asheda, and Akoda. And now I ask each one of you to call on your personal ancestors in your family and in your lineage who have gone on, who have transitioned to the spirit world, who are no longer with you, but gave you love, lifted you up, encouraged you, and continue to walk with you. So we call our names. I call Bassett. I can't hear you.
Walter Jones.
It's the Cannon. Augustus Cannon. Each one of you should be calling your ancestors' names out loud.
Chris Watson.
James L. Terrell.
Marcus Garvey. Malcolm X. Martin Luther King.
all the passes. I call
Never
upon our
ever.
collective ancestors. I can't hear you all on Zoom either. I just hear you call names out. You have to speak it so that the energy comes from your voice into the universe, asking those energies to be with you. They walk with you. You have carrying their DNA in your blood, so they are always with you anyway. So I call upon Francis Cress Welsing,
Patricia Newton, Dr. Patricia Newton,
Ashe,
Dick Gregory,
Ashe, Dr. Patricia Newton,
Cindy Portier,
Ashe, Ashe,
Chadwick Boseman.
Ashe, Adolfo Rashidi, Ashe,
all those who passed through the middle passions.
Ashe, Ashe,
All those who passed through coronavirus.
Ashe.
I pray for the divine upliftment of the recently departed, and I pray that those of middle passage, in the middle passage, Africans will be found, they will be completely, that they might be able to continue on and complete their journey in the cycle of life to death.
Jackie
Ashe.
Robinson.
Ashe. Ashe.
I close by saying, Kosi Kwon, Kosi Kwo, Kosi Ki, Kosi Kuna, Kosi Eba, Kosi Edo, Kosi Eshen, Kosi Adubu, Kosi Wahala, Ariku Bawa, Ariku Mamawa, Ashe. What I have said in Yoruba, and we believe that there is no such thing as one devil that could create so much chaos in our universe. That anything that is not good falls within that category. So I have asked our ancestors that as we gather here in this setting to celebrate African American History Month,
Alex Haley.
an international
Okay.
African celebration, I said, let us not see anything that is negative. So I want you all not to have to experience illness, not to experience lack of anything, not to experience poverty, not to go hungry, not to have clothing, not to have proper shelter. And I said, finally, as we leave this abode, let us not see death, our mother, let us not see death, our
Ashe.
And I ask you to repeat after me. Ashe means, and so be it. I say Ashe,
Ashe.
Ashe, Ashe, Ashe.
Every voice and sing. African lens. I want to thank my co-panelists as well. You're just kind of comparing cliff notes about this. So what I want to do with our students here is I'm going to give you a homework assignment in this moment. Dr. Tendai mentioned 3 names of persons on the altar she created. And I know that you might know one of the names, Marcus Mosiah Garvey. And then she also mentioned Dr. John Henrik Clark and Dr. Joseph Ben Yakinen. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with all 3 names. How many are familiar with 2 of the names? How's familiar with 1 of the names? So as the university archivist, it pains my heart as an HBCU graduate that there's not more rousing understanding of this, but there's been a lot of information that's been thrown at you over the course of your childhood and adulthood. So I want you to get on your phones right now and look up Marcus Garvey, John Henrik, Henrik Clark, and Dr. Joseph, which is with a believe a J, Ben Yakinen. And if you find one, you most likely find the other 3 as well. So this is something for you to take with you through your matriculation from Morgan. And then I also would like you to memorize, before you graduate, all 3 stanzas to lift every voice and sing. In the age of wokeness that you're calling yourself, that ancestral hymn is extremely important, and you should know all 3 stanzas. My contemporaries don't even know it. So I'm not indicting you. My contemporaries like, you're the only one that knows that, Jones. We don't know all that. So it's important that we maintain the cultural stewardship. Not just because we're brown that we're African. There's a consciousness and a commitment that goes to that. And it's not about a grade or anything else like that. This is the passive education you should have at Morgan. So I'm going to ask my colleague here to provide some academic framework, because his life's work is on W.E.B. Du Bois, whose birthday is tomorrow, I believe. And so I want him to explain to you who Du Bois was and how he serves as a prism through which African Americans relate to the Africanity of themselves and the African retention that they had throughout the course of his life.
Oh, I was gonna stand up.
Oh, you can if you want
Use
to.
my outdoor voice.
Okay.
Good afternoon, evening, Morgan. I'm glad to be here, invited for Dr. Denise Jarrett. For some of you may not be aware of this, particular undergrad students, we have a small doctoral program, and we admitted our first 4. So they are now scholars and professors and colleagues in their own right. Du Bois. But let me say this first. While Dr. Singer, my singer,
He took us, had to leave.
he's gone. While he was singing, what, Kumita Kamaye, I was interrogating James Weldon, not James Weldon Johnson, Lord have mercy. Oh Lord, I'm going. Elementary teacher. Lift every voice.
James Roseman Johnson.
Yes.
James Roseman Johnson.
James Roseman Johnson. And down in elementary school, we had to learn this and to learn a lot about other people. Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, etc., Paul Lawrence, Langston Hughes. But I was interrogating the song, let us march on until victory is won. But the very last line of that says, true to our God, true to our native land. So if you have trouble sleeping tonight, ask yourself, what is our native land, and what is my native land, and where do I live, and where do I belong, where do I fit in? But yes, W.B. Du Bois grew up in Great Barrington, Massachusetts. Tomorrow is his birthday, February the 23rd. So I share a birthday with Du Bois, and I was born on the day that Frederick Douglass made his transition in 1895. Okay, I'm going to say who's the genius child or more than a genius children in the room. I'm going to read you this and raise your hand. Don't jump up, but you can. You know the answer. 2302 Montebello Terrace in Morgan Park. Who lived there? I've already given you a hint. If your life depended on what would you say right now? Well, we already given you a hint. You are not awake. What's it say?
W.B. Du Bois.
Du Bois, yeah, right over here. And hopefully some of you would have visited the house. There, over the years, people have tried to get them to put it on the Federal Registry. But if you purchase a house or buy a house on the Federal Registry, there are only certain things that you can do. It's very limited, but it's Montebello Terrace and his daughter, Nina Yolanda, she taught at Douglas High, Frederick Douglass and Dunbar High School. And believe it or not, as I said, we had a small doctoral program. So early in my tenure here, talking about the 6 degrees of what's it, connection? It was about 1 degree of connection. Du Bois's daughter had a daughter, and she taught psychology at what's the school? It's in New Orleans. What's the name of it? Tulane. Not Tulane. No, this is HBCU. Yes, and she had her for her teacher psychology. His Du Bois's granddaughter ended up teaching in New Orleans. And I'm sorry, the school is escaping me. But I just want to let you know that Du Bois lives right here near Morgan. But to go to what Dr. Jones was saying, Du Bois is really a citizen of the global community. Long before the bison down the road used that as their standard phrase there in the global community. He saw us as African descended people. He helped set up the men from Ghana.
Nkrumah. And he was in Ghana.
Nkrumah in Ghana, and Du Bois got so I don't know, I guess some of you would say you're walking on the street corner, PO'd about the United States of America, and he went to Ghana and said that he was a communist. And I have written to the NAACP. Nobody has written me back. I responded. There's a man that came to our church. He's a friend of our pastor, and he's at NAACP here. And I asked him if it's good enough for W.E.B. Du Bois to be on a U.S. postal stamp, and if it's good enough for him to be here and there, then why isn't he good enough for the NAACP? Oh my Lord, you thought I was calling him out of his name. I told him he hadn't taken a bath that day. But I've written several letters to the NAACP people. But Du Bois has got sick and tired of being sick and tired and being in the United States. Who did I just quote when I said, I'm tired of being sick and tired? Hello, Morgan. You got to invest in yourself. Who said I'm tired of being sick and tired? Go ahead, say it loud, because you're black and proud. What's her name?
Fannie Lou.
Yes. Invest in yourself. And I mean that. I did not realize this. When I was growing up at the colored library in my hometown, let me go back. Ever since I learned to read, I've always been an inveterate reader. My father used to say, boy, why you always have your head in a book? Newspaper, magazine, or whatever. So when I went to the colored library, she recognized that I was a reader. I can't remember all the books that I read, but I do remember reading Richard Wright, his autobiography. No, not the autobiography. And then I read most of Booker T. Washington, Up From Slavery. Those are the two that I really remember reading. The reason I'm telling you this is you've got to invest in yourself. Yeah. I am the oldest of 9, now it's 8, because my brother died last year. And the reason I'm telling you this, in spite of all of her challenges, and I had a father, I want you to know that, in spite of all the challenges, my mother never said no to going to PTA. She made time for us to get our work done. So I just want to say that I was more of an accidental PhD. And once I went to college, the president a couple of years later asked me to come back once I earned my degree. And from there, the doors just kept opening. As the pastor would say, it was favor. I was more accidental. I was just thinking about just earning to be a high school teacher. My first teaching job was right the road here in Frederick, Maryland.
So to that end, in
Yes.
terms of that with teaching, and I have to point out,
Yes.
he's wearing Morgan colors.
Yes.
So in the teaching, there can be passive education.
Yes.
So programs like this to learn about countries. How many people have traveled outside of the country? If you're Native American, have you traveled outside the country?
Yes.
How many international people are here who come into the country?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
So we have an opportunity now, because you're so close to Washington, D.C., to go to the embassies. And they have an embassy crawl every spring. So even if you don't have the money to leave the country, you can go and visit the embassies and mark train tickets, very discounted for
Yes.
students, to go one way and actually go into an embassy and experience the culture and the physical space, the mannerisms and the behavior of all the countries in the world. And in the midst of doing that, if you like to travel or read, to use literature to propel yourself, there was Morgan faculty here, a woman named Dr. Ellen Irene Diggs,
Yes.
who taught sociology here.
And she thought she was going to become Mrs. Du Bois when his wife died, but Du Bois had other ideas.
So, but she believed that there was this thread of Africanity in terms of Africa as a continent. So it's not one culture or one peoples. It is an entire vast expanse of different climates, different tribal groups, languages. I mean, it's vast. And so as a result, she said, regardless of what point of that continent we came from, regardless of the forced migration to this hemisphere, black people who become black people maintain a connection to Africa. So whether you're in Central America, the Caribbean, South America, I learned about the Garifuna people in Honduras, that, I mean, these people are black people and they're Honduran.
Yes.
And so when you think of a Honduran person, you think of a Latin American person. And then there's Afro-Asian people.
Yes.
And so in Japan, the Ainu people. So there's people, the African diaspora, even down in Australia, the
Yes.
Philippines. Africa is everywhere. And what happens is we kind of go by visual optics, not understanding the historical trends, which one of my favorites you might tell is cuisine. So as a result, you get to learn the similarities of rice-eating people, how maintain the rice eating, or the peppers, or the flavors. You find certain kinds of behavior
Yeah.
across vast expanses of land.
Yeah.
Where is the commonality? All the way back to Africa.
Yes.
And for those who are American-born who have not traveled to West Africa, if you get a chance through the university to do so, while someone else pays that bill, take that opportunity. For those of you who want to be cerebral and get a Fulbright fellowship, I encourage that as well. And to learn another language. I mean, Spanish is like English now, so pick something else. Arabic, Wolof, Fulaf, there's so many other languages you can learn. And once you understand language, you understand thought process. So you understand how culture is built. So as a result, use this opportunity while you're at Morgan to not just explore the aesthetics of a culture, like I love the Afro beats, and I love, Afro beats and the soca, and the music connects us as well. Because if you didn't know the language, the beat is the same. So once again, we speak through the drums, as you see here, and our experiences. So what I want to encourage you to do here at Morgan, and I thank you for staying this late even on this day, take this Black History Month opportunity to say, okay, I'll do one thing annually. One thing to increase my knowledge. Maybe I'll visit an embassy virtually. Where is Djibouti? What is Djibouti? What is Cameroon? What was Zanzibar? I mean, so the idea of asking yourself a question and seek one thing to augment yourself as you matriculate through Morgan. You have the technology, so can someone tell me who Dr. John Henry Clark was?
I found some one hand.
Did anybody have a chance to look him up? Yes, ma'am.
Okay, my voice is kind of going. I hope y'all can hear me.
Okay.
So, John Henry Clark was an African-American historian, professor, and pioneer in the creation of Pan-African and Africana studies and professional institutions in academia starting in the late 1960s.
So he was a historian and a Pan-Africanist. He actually did lose his vision towards the end of his life because they kind of funked with the lights when he was at Yale. And so we always said there was some conspiracy there. But I had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Clark, who was born in North Carolina. So he had the issue to say, why is God not black? Because he was surrounded by images of Eurocentric ideals. So even in North Carolina, more the early part of the 20th century, he has to say there has to be somewhere else. We didn't just exist in chains. Where does Africa to me? So he becomes this great scholar. One of his acolytes is Dr. Leonard Jeffries. So that's another person I think you need to look at, Dr. Leonard Jeffries as well. These are Black American men, born, and there's women too. She mentioned Frances Cress Welsing, another name. So these are recently departed ancestors. So as you inherit the 21st century and you'll be going where we've already been, you're going to that future, we need to charge you and encourage you to be stewards of this history. Because the world is looking at it, but it's your legacy, it's your heritage. So, we can preach to you all day, but if anybody has any questions, we're gladly open to them.
But let me just say make one observation to bring. But Dr. Jones said home. If 90% of the disorders were Southern white, suddenly turned white, and they'll be talking about this. You'll be getting angry. Why do they know more about my history than I do? Yes.
Very good point. Very good point. And everyone has used the African strategy, the African American strategy, to lift themselves out of certain situations, like hip hop. Yes.
Oh, I was just saying someone's in the waiting room.
So when you look at the Palestinian situation in Israel, they're using hip hop on both sides of that issue to give voice to their frustration, but they're also fusing history. The African community in France, they're using hip hop as well, and they're using dress and behavior of hip hop to articulate what Black Americans did in this country 50 years ago with hip hop, to articulate their frustration with the economic injustice and other things like that. You here at Morgan have a very rich history as well, back in the 90s, the 60s, the 40s, of protests against injustice, and being able to put yourself physically in the space to move the needle. So now you have a very rich legacy, and I guess you should have gone somewhere else if you didn't want to be the inheritor of that. But since you're here, drink deeply from that cup and find your place in that narrative. Yes, sir.
Hello, everybody. I'm not a student here. I'm just a visitor. But I have an interesting question for you both. Okay. I am a Nigerian Jamaican. So my father took me to Jamaica when I was young, and most of my upbringing as a young person, young adult, was in Jamaica. So, watching TV in Jamaica, even from back home as I can recall, there was a lot of things about America, especially my people, Black Americans, whom I would like to refer to as African American. But the older I got, I became to realize that there's a disconnection between the Africanness and the Blackness for those of us that have had a longer history outside of the continent. So I'd like to ask you both, because you're talking about unity of all, but there's so much disunity among the whole concept of Africanness and Blackness. So for these younger people, I'm not that old, but just in case, for these younger people, I would like you to kind of explain to them the commonality of what Africanness means and Blackness, and why there shouldn't be any separation of the two, because I think globally they've separated us, and then us internally separate ourselves. So please.
Great.
I'll start. Let me just say this before I forget it. My wife and I are talking about going to Ghana this year, but now, almost 80 years since World War II, they want to go back and start a major war. This time they have more serious plateaus than they had in World War II. So hopefully, maybe we can go next year. Because my mother always said that the lady in our family, she's about 13 or 14, sold off the slave ship in Charleston, South Carolina. And that was a descendant on the lineage on her side of the family. To answer your question, sir, about what would you want to know?
How do we connect as African people?
How do we connect as African people? I'm going to quote His Royal Highness Henry Louis Gates. I heard him say this, I don't know, about 10 to 12 years ago. He's talking about there's about 40 million ways to be Black in the United States. And so that's part of the response. And the second part, he said that in the annals of history, nobody has done it like us. Black folks in the United States are the most literate people in the world, but having said that, we live in a city where there is a literacy challenge that's going on. So many of our kids cannot read. When Frederick Douglass almost got killed trying to learn to what? To read. But yes, we are an African descendant people. I worked at when I was at the University of Denver working on my master's, I got on a program called Black Focus. They're a public radio station, and we began every radio with "We are Black people," those rolling drums. And every time we were on the air, like 3 or 4 days a week, and we always open with those drums. We are an African descended people, and our culture, regardless of where you find us, they are related and interrelated, intertwined. And primarily, if I could give you just one piece of Black America, by people who couldn't even, most of them couldn't even spell the words. But I maintain, and these are certain, this is Black America's greatest thesis statement. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen, and I will argue to my last breath. But your name is Toni Morrison, James Baldwin, Alice Walker, Marvin Gaye, the staple singers. You were touching upon, I call them the 4 pillars of Black America. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen because they don't want to see us. They don't want to call us out of our name. And what's that? Those 3 letters now. Diversity, inclusion, and equity. Say my name. Say my name. So you see how it affects the culture. Even though we are, many of us are very much what's the word? Not insulated. What's the word? Assimilated. I had a postdoctoral at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And I was thinking one of 6 people. And I thank the Lord because they paid us 2 years to read, write, and reflect. And I wrote a book. And the lady told me, you're the first one that ever did this. Although they had, Black students from these top of the shelf, universities. And I want to say that from doing that, I want to say there was one lady in there. She had graduated her doctorate from Stanford University, and she studied Black music. And you know what they gave her to do? I wouldn't have took for it. They had her to teach the spiritual, and she was focusing on other parts of the Eurocentric world, but they wanted her to sing the blues. So among the others, so we would laugh and say we wouldn't do it. I know what I know, and why you gonna tell me this is what you want me to teach? Yeah. And now you may think this is trivial. Some of you are gonna find yourself in positions in your life, and some of you are probably gonna complain about some speed bumps you have faced at Morgan or will face. But keep this in mind: whether it's Morgan or Howard, we are preparing you to go out and lead the world. And don't take anything back. Don't be timid. And I'm gonna sit down. I'm sorry.
I was trying to convince someone in the room. But to your question, my fellow, I'm not Nigerian, but Barbados and Jamaica, so I'm a hybrid as well. The idea that there was actual propaganda that was played upon African people throughout the diaspora. If you haven't read Homegoing by Ya Gyasi, I hope I'm pronouncing that name correctly, she writes about this, and there's another great book, The River Where Blood is Born by Sandra Jackson Opoku, that looks at the idea of how continental Africans, because of their participation during the transatlantic slave trade, they were sold a bill of false goods. Because they knew slavery. Slavery is an ancient world system. What they did not know was that chattel was going to be attached to the definition of slavery when they dealt with Europeans. What chattel means is a legal term, it's property. So the clothes you're wearing, the chairs you're sitting on, that was equivalent to the ancestors and how they were treated. You can break the chair, throw the chair down the stairs, kill the chair, you can do whatever you want, the chair has no right to talk back. Literally, they are non-persons. So that was one element. So when they contributed to raiding each other's tribes and selling each other off, that was an ancient world practice they had done before the Europeans arrived. So it wasn't that they were doing this to spite anybody. So that's one misnomer we need to clean up. Now at the same time, what happened is they had imperialism over there. Because as the Europeans, the trade dried up, now we want to just take the whole space. We just don't want people anymore, we want to take the space. So in 1885, there was a thing called the Berlin Conference, where the European powers got together and carved up the continent. So you have Namibia, where the Germans are, you have Cameroon, where the French are, you're going to have the English-speaking countries like Ghana, and they're going to be colonial powers who are now going to dictate to those people who are from there how this is to be run. And if you want to rebel, in the Belgian Congo, they cut off your hands. Namibia, they literally executed 90% of the Horoa people. 90% of an entire nation of people were destroyed. And then they would kind of hang your body as spectacle to now make sure that you don't do that. Now in the Caribbean, in Jamaica, they had maroon communities, they had them here as well. So there were those who said, I'm not taking any of this, they went to a space where they could not be touched. And the maroon community lived apart from it. My father, who just recently transitioned at 89, said he knew the maroon people, when you got there, the law wouldn't even come. The police would just stop. Because once you're across that line, that's a whole other community back there. And so people respected that space, but they've since, I guess, integrated and kind of become more of the mainstream. So now here we get to America, North America. We have issues with colorism.
Yes.
We're gonna have issues with dialect in terms of the Deep South versus the New England area versus the West. So we now have perpetuated our own sense of, I guess, domination of mind.
That's right.
At the same point, another homework assignment is the book, The Miseducation of the Negro by Carter G. Woodson. So please add that to your reading list, and that might be the one thing you do. Carter G. Woodson, another African-American man freeborn in 1875, pens an article and penned series of articles talking about miseducation. He said, if you can control a man's thinking, I don't have to worry about your actions. Because I've already conditioned you. So you'll go to the back door, and if there is no back door, you'll make one. So that's 90 years old. This book is actually 90 years old this year. So what Woodson saw from his enslaved parentage and the uncles who were enslaved in West Virginia, understood that this is where the control is. This is where the fight is. And once we control this in Africa, in South America, Asia, once we control this,
That's right.
and you see it happening in Florida right now, you see it happening in other states around the country. And then I know history is very boring, and they make it very boring for you. History is intellectual nutrition. And we are a very malnourished country because everyone wants to remember it from this day forward. So there is no back. No, there has to be a back. How did we get here? And why is there a vertical relationship between male and female, have and have not? There's a reason why that's in place. So while you're at Morgan and you're matriculating through Morgan, and along with your one history thing you do, please seek out these kinds of programs to add to your understanding. Maybe you'll never read the book while you're here, but as your post-Morgan life might say, I remember someone mentioned that book. Maybe I should look at that book, get it on audiobook. So I encourage you for that. And I don't know if there's any other questions in the chat here, but if there's any other questions on the floor as well. Yes, ma'am. Yes, the book is The Miseducation of the Negro. The Miseducation of the Negro by Carter G. Woodson. The Miseducation of the Negro by Carter G. Woodson. It's a very short read, but it's very profound. This man is going to be writing this book after 40 years of teaching. He taught the Philippines in the early part of the 20th century, and they actually wrote a book called The Miseducation of the Filipinos.
All right.
As a result of understanding how the colonialized mind, I don't have to put shackles on, I can just get this.
That's right.
And once I have
Once
this,
you got that,
I can turn your head anyway.
Yeah.
And so as a result of that, from John Henry Clark, Francis Cresswell, they understood you have to unlock this first. It's a very hard thing to unlock. And then like he said, to Gates's credit, that we don't have to look the same way black. If your hair is gonna be natural, you wanna wear perm, you wanna wear weave, that's the least of our concern.
Yeah.
Can you just acknowledge that you're African?
That's right.
And that's all of us. All of humanity was birthed out of Africa.
And of course.
The oldest relics from our archaeological finds are in the eastern part of Africa. So all of mankind literally stood up and walked out of Africa. So it's very important for us to understand why there's a fight for how we should see Africa. It is the largest landmass in the world. But if you look at the maps, they make it smaller.
Make it small.
And Asia seems so much bigger. Well, why are the Chinese fighting to leave China? Because that's not habitable land.
And they go out and
They can't live there. And just another quick point, I guess I read you in newspapers. They're trying to build a land bridge between Russia and China.
Yes.
Yeah.
Did you know that Russia and China are physically on the same space?
That's right.
So Putin is paying people to move to Siberia to make it habitable so they can have a land bridge. China is also woke to Africa, and they're pillaging and raping Africa as we
Yes,
speak.
they are.
Messing up the West Coast with fishing and other kinds of things that they're doing. They're worse than the Europeans were. So when we understand that Africa, in particular Nigeria, I believe, and some of the West African countries, are almost gonna be 70% under the age of 35 in the next 5 or 10 years. And the intelligence they have, but they don't have the natural resources. But they're so determined to learn. You need to start making connections with those people in microeconomics. So yes, question, thank you.
That's the question I had, Dr. Jones. I teach in family and consumer science, interior design, and one of our topics was the African influence of architecture and interior design. And so the students began to discuss that. But then I had one student to say, well, the Africans do not like us. And then the African student said, the African Americans do not like us. And so it wasn't an argument, but it was a debate. And I told them that we all came from the same place and we have to get along the best that we could. But also what surprised me was they were saying the same thing that people said when I was a young girl a while back. But still they were saying the same myths about the African food
Yes.
and the African dress and the African Americans make fun of African people. And so, you know, I told my colleagues about it, and that's one of the reasons that we want to talk about it. We want to have a conversation about that. So how can we bridge that gap? Because I was just alarmed that the same myths are still being told to each of us.
That's a very good question, and I'll think
No,
I'll hand it over to you.
I'm gonna let you handle
You
this.
tell I like to talk. I said I read time. Okay, this is the last question. Thank you. I can talk all day. Anyway, you gave me the mic.
I know.
But
yeah,
nevertheless,
I'm
the only
loving what
way to
you said.
dispel those myths is by these kinds of engagements. It's going to take one-on-one. So when you actually meet a person from another continent, or you hear another language, you hear another speech pattern. He's from Alabama.
Yes.
I'm from Massachusetts. We both African. Now they talk a little slower down there. They move a little different down there than we do up where I come from. But that's how they get down. And look what's come out of Alabama: Tuskegee and Booker T. Washington. So there's been great progress down there. All black faces.
Yes.
In Massachusetts, we might have one or two black faces, but we don't run the whole thing. So as a result, it's very important to kind of weigh the substance of something. So these kinds of programs are very important, because now there are Africans coming here who are extremely wealthy, who look down their nose at black Americans because of their wealth. So we need to have these one-on-one conversations to really discuss our humanity at the end of the day. So thank you so much. I'll give the mic.
I just want to say very quickly, to go to the Bible, talking about Africa. I can remember growing up, you don't hear it preached too much today, but about Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. The Bible is made of people who look just like everyone in this room. And if you don't believe, you can go right down the road to Bisonland, to Frank Snowden, Blacks in Antiquity. There was no hardcore racism as far as excluding, not excluding, degradation because of your skin. But they call it Ethiopian because it was sort of rusty. That's how they looked at the color of your skin and equated it that way, but not because of how God or the Creator had made you. They did not deduct that from you. So yes, I am black, but beautiful. I am black and beautiful. And Howard man, Dr. Kane Hope Felder, we can say Ashe to him. He did a book on the original African Studies Bible. And in his introduction, he deconstructs all of this and recenters this. In fact, he was saying in his first book, people were saying, why are you even working on black folk? Troubling biblical waters, the black people in the Bible. And he said that when he was working on this, he's from South Carolina, he said the reason when he was working on this, his classmates, meaning his black classmates, said, Kane, why are you doing this? And what happened? He published a book, and a man from Chicago called him one day and said, my Sunday school class, they have just taken your book and made a little Bible study, a study guide with it. And who was that man who called him? The Holy Ghost, Reverend Jeremiah Wright.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so he got together with them and did a Bible study. Kane Oakfelder. The reason they called him Kane, he said his uncle raped the mother. And she said there's always hope. So she named him Cain, the mark of Cain. All right. Thank you.
Now let's give a big
Dr. Jones and Dr. Hubbard, we're so proud that you came, even thought that our programs are of interest to you. And
Yes,
there's just
thank you
all
so
the
much.
knowledge that both of you have. You see the knowledge, I always talk about your students, and the knowledge, and that's you in the future. So what our goal as older people, or I say mature people, is to pass it along to you. And so one day, some of you will be there teaching the knowledge, keeping the legacy alive. So we want to thank you both for
Thank
such
you.
a
Thank
wonderful conversation.
Thank you.
Siten sidi basama ali taria di basana izitame mata sonna kibu pilo bayeta di biba basi keninga batu Sit and